My main thesis regards what I call the culture of ambiguity, which confuses the difference between winning and losing as it is in the natural world, in the jungle as it were, in order to undermine the ambition and the desire and the lust of the strong man who wants to go from losing to winning. In this regard, I'd like to look at the concept of masochism, and then to look at how that concept of masochism connects with Clive Barker's Hellraiser Trilogy. Now, my thesis is that masochism does not exist, that it is an invention, it is a psyop. Masochism is a very important psyop for the culture of ambiguity. What masochism does is confuse the difference between winning and losing by confusing the difference between pleasure and pain. With masochism, the losing that is pain can become the winning that is unknown pleasures. Obviously, the concept of masochism means that the strong man won't strive for the fruits of the earth, he won't strive for the fruits of the earth that will automatically give natural pleasure in the most straightforward way, vanilla pleasure as it were. Simply putting up a sort of plastic decoy for the strong man to actually go for, which enables the weak in power to actually grasp all those fruits of the earth for themselves. The reason why masochism doesn't exist is because you can see how the average masochist always has his safe space, always has his limits, always has his safe word, which he will cry out, and at that point the alchemical experiment will supposedly stop. And if the safe word doesn't work, then he finds out again that unfortunately pain is pain, just as pleasure is pleasure. The whole mystery collapses. That is because masochism doesn't exist. If masochism existed, if masochism was real, then nobody would do anything. There would be no pleasure. There is no kink that changes that law of nature, that people require pleasure. You can't really fool your nerves. The nerves of men are designed by evolution to mesh with the fruits of the earth, which will give them pleasure. You can't really change those natural laws. And that is why life is a battle for the fruits of the earth. That battle stops the moment masochism becomes a real thing. But of course, masochism isn't real. The battle stops for the strong man who's been defanged, which is as it should be, because he is then controllable. Anyway, I would like to connect this concept of masochism being a psyop, masochism as something that does not exist, with Clive Barker's Hellraiser Trilogy, Hellraiser 1, 2 and 3. Because I feel that these films very cleverly subvert and undermine the myth that is masochism, even though they are known as being sadomasochistic, alternative lifestyle, celebratory films. The genius of these films is that they are a sort of ambiguity against the ambiguity. The Cenobites promise this world in which inflicting pain and suffering pain of an extreme nature, an unworldly extreme nature, will give unknown pleasures, and this is the basic thesis. Of course, the Cenobites themselves are somewhat conflicted, and those who are initiated into this world, most of them try to come back at some point. They can't actually stand it, which is because pain is pain. that this is how the films undermine their own celebration of masochism and sadomasochism. The Hellraiser films, masochism and the blending of pleasure and pain is right there at the beginning of the movie, when Frank discovers the box and says, I was in for, extreme sensations, heaven or hell, I didn't really care. That's front and center of the movie. Implicit in these movies is the concept of the sort of alternative lifestyle, transgressive lifestyle, I think. Mostly made in the 80s and a little bit in the 90s. There's this concept of bourgeois life being dull and boring, ordinary pleasures being dull and boring, and these unknown pleasures being out of this world, literally, and you have to be initiated. And although that's the almost the theme and the appeal of these three movies, and yet it subverts these concepts by particularly in Hellraiser 3, when the Pinhead comes back to Earth and he turns up at the Boiler House nightclub, which is a sort of I don't know what you would call it, a sort of transgressive, punky, gothic S&M club in which a load of I don't know, sort of yuppie types are going in order to be edgy and whatever. And of course they don't really believe in, they don't really want to go to the edge, they just want to pose, really. And there's like little dolls with skewers through them hanging from the walls, and the head Cenobite comes and activates all these creatures. All these dolls come to life, and the nightclub fair weather friends, as it were, are all tortured by these creatures that come to life. The decor of this S&M club comes to life and skewers them all violently, whilst the head Cenobite Pinhead laughs satanically. Because they bought into a lie, they bought into something they were merely posing as, which you could say that they don't really, it's because they didn't go far enough, or you could say it's because pain really is pain. Horror really is horror. So I do think this subverts the entire culture of transgressive aesthetics or whatever. And of course this culture is now with us to the extent that we have people actually look like Cenobites now. So they've taken on board the that aesthetic into their own flesh, really. There's a wonderful bit in Hellraiser 2 in which Julia sort of says to Dr. Channard, so, you wanted to know, well now you know. You wanted to know unknown pleasures, well now you know. This horrific extreme world in which he is agonized. And that's one of the jokes, the unknown pleasures are actually unbearably horrific in this labyrinthine world of the Hellraisers. And then that's twisted on its head for a little while when Channard suddenly warms to this new world of heaven and hell, as it were, and he's sort of like out there on a sort of windy ledge in this labyrinthine world. There's this sound in the background of sort of metal on metal. It's a bit like this giant scythe, which I think is something to do with the Hellraiser 3 thing, like the sound of razor on flesh forever. It's just an awesome moment. And he says, to think I hesitated. And it's an amazing moment. And as a response to that, of course, this moment where he finds pleasure in pain, his own sort of scorpion tail comes down on his head, and he's back to this absolute agony again. Pain is pain again, yet again. So the genius of these movies is that they show, via their grandiose baroque nature, they show how the normal concept of masochism that people have, the everyday concept of masochism, which is, like, oh, these shoes hurt, but I quite like it, or the cult of cold baths in the morning, or, no pain, no gain, all that sort of cult of minor pain, minor masochism. And also the sort of casual whips and chains gimp culture, maybe not taken too seriously by the practitioners, people trying to LARP, as it were, and try to seem more sophisticated than they actually are. That sort of everyday masochism is, in fact, as crazy and as baroque and as outlandish as the giant labyrinth of the Hellraiser Cenobites. He shows that both are equally absurd, or one is as absurd as the other. One is as outlandish and overblown as the other, because masochism does not exist. Pain is pain, pleasure is pleasure, and the true heaven and hell is the battle to win, to obtain the winning that is pleasure and avoid the losing that is pain. The true horror, or the true heaven and hell, the true excitement is the battle to secure the fruits of the earth, the pleasure-giving fruits of the earth, and avoid the agonies of the earth. It is the attempt to enjoy Lord time over slave time, the time in a pleasure palace rather than the time in a dungeon. That is the true unknown pleasure, is that world, the world of the difference between winning and losing. That is the true unknown pleasure, and that is the true initiation.